Brilliant.
Okay. Well, I am just about to begin an interview with British pianist Jonathan Phillips. It's going to be about your 2023 Divine Art release. It's called, and we're going to talk about this, it's called Tranquility. And it's all Bach, and you have very carefully curated an album that is I listened to it today and a little bit last night, and did my stream of consciousness notes on the on the keyboard. But the calm, I think we even used that word before we went on there. The calm, the meditation, the care in movement from note to note. It sounds kind of dumb, but I think you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Just the idea that there is no hurry about anything in life, at least in my view, now that
Yeah.
I'm getting older. I want to. This will all go up on performingartsreview.net at the site with how to purchase the CD and so on. But I just want everybody out there, because so many are faculty, or college faculty, to know that this really is really a beautiful meditative uh, album of very very deliberately chosen works. And we know that sometimes purists will go, "What do you mean you're just doing the prelude and you're not doing, stuff like that?" Well, of course, that's not the point. The point is to give us a very restful, calming experience, and it certainly did that. So I'm really pleased with this. We've got preludes, we've got organ concertos in transcription for piano. We'll talk about some of these fabulous transcriptionists, transcribers. We got Goldberg. We got a little bit of lots of preludes from Preludes and Fugues in Bach's. Where some stuff I think I mentioned earlier. This where is it here? This that wonderful movement from the oboe concerto, transcribed
Yes.
for piano, and also to hear for me, also, and I'm sure for everybody, to hear a lot of these transcriptions done by fabulous composers in their own right, but to finally hear so much more. It's such a pleasure to hear so much more, especially the organ transcriptions and so on. This is the I was speaking earlier about this concerto in D minor, the oboe
Yes.
concerto after Machak. That was just a treat to hear that. I guess it was one movement. I don't see it here, but probably a slow movement, if I recall correctly.
Yeah.
Anyway, wonderful stuff. Now about Jonathan, about Jonathan Phillips. I always do the intros after we've had a talk for 20 minutes, which is crazy. Graduate of Royal Northern College of Music, studied with Sulamita Aronofsky, and postgraduate work with Alexandra Kelly in London. You live in the Cotswolds with your wife, and you've pushed the kids out. The two boys are on their own now. So you can just kind of, dare I say, relax and make recordings.
That would be nice, but I keep doing these crazy projects, so here we are.
Well, like I said, relax and make music and make recordings, and create a posterity or a whatever that other word is for this, not a relic. That's too premature. Anyway, when I see programming like this, I always wonder about the planning involved, because this is very carefully curated. So part of me was asking, but I didn't have time, or frankly the interest, to just determine whether there was a complex cosmology of key movement. But tell me about this. How did you arrange 21 pieces on this album? Was it a nightmare? Was it okay?
It was. Do you know what? That's a really good question, and I can't pull wool over anybody's eyes here. It just seemed to feel right. And you're right. There is obviously, even if it's not conscious, there's a subconscious way in which you think, does this work follow from the next one? Do they work?
Yeah.
And there are a few places where the key changes might be considered a bit dramatic in an ordinary program, but the sense and reference of the piece seemed to fit what was coming next. And when I tried it out in a concert, and I thought, well, actually, the first, it was like doing them. It almost seemed to me that they group together more or less and cohere in groups of 3, 4, 5 at a time.
I was curious. Yes, please continue. I thought I was beginning to see some kind of a pattern of groups. Go ahead. Sorry to interrupt you.
No. So it was fairly natural, fairly spontaneous, fairly organic um, and I allowed it to just see, well, does that work if you follow this prelude and fugue with that prelude or this toccata, and then putting certain key areas together, A minor and D minor in the middle of the thing, with So it was a bit of trial and error, but it just seemed to come together to have some sort of sense of beginning, middle, and end. We do have a kind of structure to it, even though I haven't imposed it with great, as you say, academic rigor, and this all follows, and that was my logic behind it. It just seemed to work in this case. And
Can I interrupt you?
Well, interesting. The first, it was supposed to go out in 2020 on a different label, and they wanted an extra 15 or 20 minutes onto it, so we had to go back in the studio during lockdown to put another couple of items in. And that was the bigger problem, because I'd already set the original program for about 55 minutes, and then we had to go back and put in whatever it was, 20 minutes worth, and plug those new pieces in to see that they didn't still spoil that overarching previous version of it. And I actually think it's better because of that, but that's just my view. It was a little bit condensed.
You mean a producer actually put you in the right direction? Some people in charge said, "Hey, we need another 20 minutes." Yeah, go ahead, please.
Well, no. So I'm glad you think it works as a program. There is always a danger with a set of random 21 pieces, one after the other, that people could lose the will to live after, however lovely it is. By the time you get to number 6, it's like, can we just have something else? But I wanted to set the agenda, which was they were.
I worried about that. Frankly, as I was listening, I thought, at what point am I going to just stop taking notes? Well, I stopped taking notes at a certain point toward the end, simply because there was no more to be said. It was there. It was, But yes, interesting. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So what that tells me is that the uniqueness of some of all of the compositions means that although they are still and tranquil and calm and serene and all those lovely things we're trying to achieve, there's still sufficient texture and interest in all of them to be unique and to be contrasting within that narrow band of the objective of setting this as being a very peaceful, contemplative CD. That was always a danger, and some people will probably just read the thing, say J.S. Bach's Tranquility. I'm not going to listen to that because it's just going to be, just easy peasy stuff. But actually, there's a 5-part fugue in there, the C sharp minor one from Book 1, which is, it's a fantastic piece of work. And for me, it's like getting that in under the radar to let people who wouldn't otherwise have gone to a Bach Prelude and Fugue say, hey, well, just have a listen to that. You didn't know this was coming, but actually, you rather liked it. And the same with the D sharp minor one. It's very easy to just do the E flat minor prelude because it's so beautiful, but that little fugue afterwards is just glorious. It's just wonderful.
My impression
it's such a beautiful piece.
They too are very contemplative, and then they, what I mean. The tempi are all, as I recall, I think there were 2 fugues in this album. I can't remember, 2 at least.
Yes.
Are all they're the slow fugues. They're the fugues that you can lose your mind in. So bravo.
And they're the ones that for me, I might be a bit contentious here, but I think they're the ones that separate out the musicians from the keyboard players. Because ultimately you have to be able to make the piano sing, and you have to hold multiple lines simultaneously, and you have to be able to breathe and project and voice and articulate and allow the thing to sound natural and spontaneous. And the piano is working against you, because we said earlier, it's a percussion instrument and the sound is dying. So it's quite for me, they're the greatest test, really, of your skills. So that's why I've always played them, because all of my teachers have required me to play Bach, and so it's become ingrained. But they really do find you out, and they're never perfect. They're never there. There's always, you think, I can just this bit and do that. There's always something that he will improve you as a person and as a musician if you carry on playing his work. So that was my kind of snapshot of it back in 2019 and 21. But I'm sure if I played them next year, I'd reinterpret them again. That's the point of art, generally, isn't it? Mm-hmm.
Of course. And also you used a very important word, because we've had the conversation about academia. and that you have not particularly been, are not particularly an academic. Neither am I. I'm a conductor. I want to paint pictures, on the hills. I want hillsides and pastels and the castle over there, but that is intuitive. And I think what I'm trying to say is the most important thing is intuition, is just intuiting these deep sub-basements of meaning in all this music. That's why we're in this profession. It's so profound, all of it, and what composers have to say. So that was interesting what you just said. And no, the fugues didn't upset anything. If anything, you mentioned a rabbit hole before we recorded. If anything, the fugues took me into a deep rabbit hole precisely because they were so calm. Believe it or not, even as you said, the 5-part fugue, everything was so clean and clear, and nothing was what do you call that? Histrionic. In fact, there is nothing histrionic here for quite a deliberate purpose and for good reason. It's just a repertoire alone. So, I'm glad. And now let me quote you. You say, I made this work principally for myself, so it agrees exceedingly well with my constitution. I love the Brits, the way they use words. It's just delicious. So it agrees exceedingly well with my constitution, don't you know? If any man has a mind to take part with me, he is very welcome to do so. But let him carry this consideration with him, that he is a very unmannerly guest. This is also help. Give me the philosopher. He's a very unmannerly guest that presses upon another body's table and then quarrels with his dinner. I love that. I'm not quite sure why, but in the context of this CD, as you mentioned, when you do quote Immanuel Kant, you, the non-academic, quoting Immanuel Kant, the two conditions that we talked about this often, the condition of felt response, felt experienced response in an audience, of how they absorb emotionally and even physically. The condition of felt response is important, and the absence of rules, which to me in a way says the absence of a bar line, the absence of strict structure in many ways. For example, I love all your rubati and all your tenuti and the way you approach cadential moments. It's entirely you. It's wonderful. How close am I to complimenting you or insulting you?
Yeah, well, so just to pick you up on what you said about Kant, I think those two, to just go back on that, the condition of felt response and the absence of rules, it's just he was getting at that nobody can formulate, if you do this and then you do that and then you do these following things, you will make people's, whatever those things are, some kind of formula for a magic response, like in pop music. Use these chords, do this, do that after 16 bars and you'll have a hit, whatever. Some people think you can do that. Maybe they can. I don't. Kant didn't. And it was the idea that you can't force people to respond aesthetically to things. And actually sometimes, and this is the key point for me, it's the surprising fact that people who maybe never had any background in music or whatever, it happens all the time. People go to films and then they suddenly find that the film score is completely overwhelming. I've seen people kind of come out of concerts in tears. They've never heard this sort of music before, but it's being open to and responding to something much, much deeper without any prejudice, without any sort of, well, I don't listen to that, I only like this kind of music, and just getting back in your bunker about what your experience is. And I think Kant was onto something there. And I think the absence of rules wasn't necessarily about that you should just be kind of free for all with your composition, but it's about rules applying to formulas that will trigger an aesthetic response in people. That's the way I kind of read it.
Yeah, exactly right. And I may not have expressed myself well about the absence of rules, but I quite agree with what you're saying. What I get from absence of rules is the allowance to expand your imagination.
Yeah,
the
absolutely.
Allowance to linger on a phrase, if you will. Whether or not people fall asleep or leave the room or not, who cares? When one is in those moments of creativity, and that's really my greatest compliment to you, because, and that's why I asked you earlier whether you might be a recluse, because one can, and I want to talk about piano, and I want to talk about studio in a second, but listening can feel a genuine uh, a genuine intimacy in the way you play, and that's all about you. Okay. So
Okay. First of
go
all,
go.
thank you. Yeah, I suppose it's a tricky thing because when you're trained, and I certainly railed against it when I went. I mean, I was lucky. I had some great teachers when I was very very young. I could play quite well. I got a place at conservatoire, and suddenly I had this wonderful, crazy Russian piano teacher who was, I mean, a wonderful. I mean, I was scared to death of her, basically, and so was
Russian
everybody else.
women will do that.
Oh,
Russian
well,
women
so
will
was
do that.
anybody else. I mean, she was formidable lady, absolutely formidable. And there are stories about her allegiance, but that's for another day. But the thing was, she she said, look, it's all fine, it's all in your head, it's all here, it's great, but I want you to project this. I want you to play this for the dumb, stupid people at the back of the hall. They've got to hear this. You've got to shape things. You've got to articulate. You've got to present it so that you're guiding them through the story and the narrative of this piece, and you're leaving them in no doubt about where you're driving to, what point you're trying to make, and how we're going to arrive at this given destination. So everything was shaped with just tremendous care, and I mean that just left it just left such a mark on my sort of upbringing.
Yeah, it shows in your music making, clearly.
That you just, everything matters. You just play as if your life depends on it, basically.
And is this Sulamita Aronofsky?
Yeah, absolutely.
Aronofsky?
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, well, and Russian musicians are crazy, for starters. I mean, I'm being extremely, what do you call that, stereotypical, but so true about characters, natural characters, and so on. But
Yeah,
dynamic.
she was just so uh, demanding and demanding about the quality of your sound and the burnishing of the sound and just the way in which you caress the instrument to be able to make these glorious sonorities. And it's all, I suppose that's all part of her tradition, having been brought up in the Soviet system in the 20th century. Yeah, I mean that's that. So I mean, some people would take umbrage at that and say, well, actually, there's that whole argument about it shouldn't be on the piano in the first place. It should just be, in a museum somewhere on a harpsichord or whatever. And there are still people who feel that. There are still some people.
Brits can't possibly have that opinion, surely. We can't have fallen that far.
It's there's still a little bit of resistance. You still get a little bit of kind of sniffiness around the fact that you're playing it on the piano, you heretic.
Oh, that issue. Yes, that's so stupid. That is, I was going to let me stop you there because I had a thought earlier, which is that yes, we are speaking about a percussive instrument, piano,
yes.
forte piano, harpsichord, and so on, all percussive instruments, and the sound immediately begins to decay. But what a glory is the forte piano, is the modern piano in terms of being able to sustain
exactly.
sound. So again, as I didn't mean to get us off subject, but as I listened to this album today, what I loved was the way you used the modern instrument. You know what I mean? Not for show off, not for this or that other stupid idiot reason, but to enhance the color or to give even dynamics. And it's crazy even to talk of dynamics in Baroque repertoire, if you kind of get my drift. But that's what makes this album not at all over the top. Very much honoring the period and the form and all the rest, but adding those extra colors and dynamics that we can now with the modern instrument. So all those people say, oh, well, it's on high and poo-poo. That's what I say.
Anyway. That's it. I mean, the thing is, Dan, as you can't please all the people all the time, can you? So it will find the people who need to find it, and they will listen, and hopefully that will be good. And there'll be those people who won't, and that's fine also.
That's right. You've got another CD to do, no doubt, coming up. You know what I mean? I mean, we just move on.
Yeah.
So I'm a critic. You can imagine. I just move on. I do my thing and I move on before the pitchforks and torches get at me.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, and speaking of the beauty of these transcriptions, let me ask you. I don't know how you're going to do this, but give me because we've talked about it, a couple of the wonderful 19th century and 20th century composers who have made some of these transcriptions, and I want particularly to look at the transcriptions of the organ works, because
Yeah.
for me it was wonderful just to hear everything so cleanly and clearly, all the inner parts and so. Go ahead about some of these wonderful transcriptions. I'm thinking of Busoni, for example.
Well, the thing is, I mean, until I'd come across these, all I knew was the Chaconne arrangement by Busoni, which I'd played a long time ago and was fantastic. But that's a big bravura showpiece of a
Yeah,
thing.
yeah.
And I thought, could I put this on this album? No chance. So I went away and I had a little look, and I tell you what it was. I heard there's a fabulous French pianist. I'll come up with her name in a minute. Anne Kepl. And I heard her. I don't know. On YouTube or something, and I heard these two transcriptions, the Bosoni ones, and I thought, wow, these are really something. And she plays them beautifully. And I just thought, I've got to go and learn that. I've just got to do this. And what strikes me is just the craftsmanship of the way he's able to exploit the sonority of the piano. So you've got this big range, and you're using 3-4 octaves worth of the piano to be able to get a really extraordinary range of tonality. And it kind of works. You've got to have quite big hands for it. It's a little bit congested in parts, so you have to split some things a bit carefully. But
interesting. That's very interesting.
It just shows, it's like a combination. His playing must have been a combination of Brahms meets Rachmaninoff. Just enormous, great shovels of hands, but really very, very true to the original counterpoint. So all the voicing that's in there, it could be quite muddy because a lot of it's quite down in the tenor and the baritone area.
Why I was so thrilled.
Yeah, and it's quite hard. It's quite hard to get the texture right to bring that out. So you've got to have a good instrument and a nice acoustic as well. And it's very easy for that to become just very muddy. But it's a great challenge because it is there, and he marks it really beautifully in the score. So you'd have to be really dumb not to see what he wants. And so just follow follow the instructions and see if you can do it as well as possible. But they're really well crafted pieces, both of those. And so the other one we were talking about, you said about number.
Well, the organ transcriptions, just
number 17. I don't know what it is about that piece, but it's in A minor.
Number 17, did you say?
Yeah, it just sits in an extraordinary place on the keyboard, and there's something about allowing the piano to resonate and allowing the harmonics that are set by the intervals that are in the chords to also enhance the sound in combination with the pedal and the soundboard and the acoustic and the speed and your physiology, the way in which you've coaxed the sound out of the instrument, to just let it sit and hang and then try and shape it. And that's the challenge of playing the piano.
This is the toccata in C major, right? The Adagio, number 17.
Yeah.
And I'm just looking at my stream of consciousness. Oops, sorry, there's a fire engine going by. It's of course quite a recognizable tune. That's the other thing. You took great chances, really, because even just music lovers are going to recognize a lot of these pieces.
Yeah.
But and by the way, this one you really did build up a steam. I have a note that says powerfully played, wonderfully and powerfully played, and you seldom do that in this. You know what I mean? Because it's meditative, and it's never over the top. It's just that you give.
Yeah, it's about getting that to build to that kind of climax in the piece, where it's still only sort of mezzo forte, but in the context of the stillness of the piece and the savagery that you could impose on it. It's about that. I know it's a big D minor chord, and if it was Rachmaninoff, we'd be deaf by now. It was just about controlling it in such a way that it made sense structurally to the piece, that this is the apex moment. This is the point of the piece where, right, we've kind of arrived, and now I'm going to take you back, and you're going to sit there in a sort of melted heap at the end thinking, wow, what just happened? That's just such an extraordinary moment that it just builds so beautifully.
First, I thought you were speaking of the pianist. Now I realize you're speaking of the melted heap, the audience. or both.
Possibly both. Yeah.
I didn't mean to break things up, but you hit on something, and of course I'm getting older now, so I have to jump in before I forget. But let's talk a little bit about the I'm not sure we've mentioned yet, but you have this idea, it's quite correct idea of play it, maybe play it twice, and be done with it. In other words, none of this splicing and stuff in terms of the recording process. Can you tell me about the room, the instrument, everything about this recording that has to do with the studio, because it's such a clean, gorgeous,
Okay.
acoustic. It's so wonderful.
Yeah.
So,
You're absolutely right. So there are a couple of things there. So just rolling all the way back from the chat we had before the cameras were rolling. Yeah, I'd done recordings before, BBC stuff, all that kind of thing, studio recordings, and I'd never really liked it, Dan. It was always, can we just do that bit, another 4 bars of this, and can you do the upbeat into this section? And we're going to take a break now, and then it's like there was no continuity, and it felt to me that it was a kind of Frankenstein version of whatever piece we were doing, because you'd bolted this thing together, and it may look and it may work, and it walks and talks and eats and does stuff, probably kills people, but actually it's not the real performance because you've just hodged it together. And I just instinctively as a young man, I railed against that, couldn't do it. So when it came to this, I thought I've got to find a venue that's going to have a lovely acoustic and a good piano. And my recording engineer, David Wright from Gemini Sound, he'd recorded a concert I did in a church up in Chipping Campden for the festival there many, many years ago. And he just came on the day, set it up, recorded it, sent me the CD, and I thought, wow, that's a lovely sounding way he's mic'd it and everything, beautiful. So I gave him a call for this, and he retired, and I said, that's a shame because I'd like to do one again. But he said, oh, well, it's not too far away. I know a place. So Oxford, it's a lovely venue, St John the Evangelist Church in Oxford, and they've got a 2008-9 Model D Steinway, which is immaculate. And it's one of those ones, people say about Steinway that they're the most consistent piano. In a sense, that's true. They're very robust. There's something about them that's uniquely recognizable, but some are more special than others. And this one, I wouldn't have wanted to play Chopin etudes on it, or Liszt, or Scriabin sonatas. It's a much more Bluthner-esque piano. It has a real bloom to it, has a wonderful, round, rich, soft sound. It's got ping and penetration and a really good singing projection, but it has a mellowness at its heart as well. And so I went there and tried it for a few hours and said, well, this is the one, so we do it. So when it came to it, I'd run the program a couple of times in some concerts, and we just ran through the program essentially. You're sort of there in the church on your own on a raised platform, and there's a couple of microphones and an empty big old church and this glorious piano. And I just played like you're just having a performance run through to test your memory or to just see how things are, instead of all that nitty gritty work of just doing bits and pieces. And we just did it 2 takes and then on to the next one, 2 takes and on to the next one, and then have some lunch. And David would come back and say, I just need to do a little bit here because I can hear an ambulance, or I can hear there's a couple of birds singing at the back of the church, or somebody actually came into the church and said, oh, that's a nice church. Just lock the door and go away, that kind of thing. So it was just remedial editing for the sake of blemishes that were beyond my control, as opposed to really bad things I might have done.
Well done.
Yeah,
good defense.
So the aim was to make it like a live performance, and that's what they are.
And that is exactly the point, is it not? I do believe Pat had something to say about that, didn't he? Hang on, I got to find his quote. Well, the condition of a felt response of just, shut the doors, leave me alone, let me get into my thing. And you're the first one I think I mentioned to you that I was involved, as an observer of lots of recording sessions with the Seattle Symphony in the 70s. Yeah. I guess the 70s mostly. They recorded all kinds of David Diamond symphonies and whatnot. And they did this process, of course, I guess it's still considered quite standard, bits and pieces, sections and sections. Somehow it all went together. But you know what? In time, you can actually hear the difference in the sound. The air in the room creates a different sound. I mean, it's very, very tricky stuff.
Yeah.
Splicing, all the rest of it. So that's what I like is you did the right thing. It's like, shut the door, get out of here, leave me alone, let me get into my head. And you're the first one to explain that it drives artists crazy when you're in the studio and somebody's coming in on a mic.
Yeah, it is just no. It's almost it's so counterintuitive, so counterproductive. Do you know what? You just reminded me. There's a Stephen Huff, the wonderful Sir Stephen Huff, the wonderful British pianist,
Yes,
fantastic
yes.
guy. He's also a writer and a painter and a
Yeah,
great polymath.
yes,
But
I know it's disgusting.
in his book, he said something about recording, and it's something very similar to this. But his chief point was there is no point in going and recording something and placing it all together like that if ultimately you can't actually play it live. So why don't you just do your performance? And that's what he tries to do. He plays his performances. So I think the Rachmaninoff concertos he did a few years ago, they did them as live takes. After they'd done a couple of tours, and then
I
one
love
night
it,
up.
but that's scary. I
Yeah,
love it, but that's
they
scary.
played them, and then when the audience went out at the end, uh, orchestra would stay on stage and they just top and tail some moments where somebody coughed or a phone went off, or if there was some disaster somewhere, which I doubt. But they just fixed a few tiny things. That's it, and they're basically live performances, and they're
I like it much
fantastic.
better. I like it much better. Yeah, I remember. I'm trying to remember Antal Darate, the
Yeah,
conductor in the Detroit Symphony. I think it was. They, hung two mics, played. There was nothing about splicing and dicing at all. Just played it, and
just
that was
play it.
it. A movement at a time, for example. But still,
Yeah,
I like that. And spontaneity, which we've touched on a bit, isn't quite the right word. Spontaneity almost implies accident. But
yes,
and so I can't quite figure it, but I agree entirely. That's, as I mentioned to you off camera, that's why, of course, I don't do any editing of our chats. They're either good or bad. It doesn't matter. But to chop them up, it just never works. It just never works. It
yeah,
always comes out fuzzy. Okay, now Why don't we? Are you okay on hearing me? Um,
yes,
why don't you know what I would like to do? It's a little corny. It's almost an out, a cheap way out. But I have a couple of pieces here. I've had some, I had some interest in that I wanted to talk to you about. But how about, because it must be so, after all this, putting this thing together, 21 pieces, movements from, and so on and so forth. Can you recall? It's a dumb question in a way, but can recall magical moments that number 12 just really worked or something? That maybe that way we can touch on some of these 21 pieces. Is that asking
yes.
me too much?
No, no, it's right because the whole process, and I'm sure lots of people who will be watching this, hopefully
That's
musicians,
right.
will it will resonate. I don't mean that the pun's not intended. Um, uh, but yes, so there's something that happens, and it's the concentration and the opportunity. Particularly, I found on the second take sometimes where you just, having relaxed sufficiently, assessed the instrument, maybe played one or two of the pieces. As we went through the session, there were some times when you're trying to see if you can just take it down even further, see if you can just control, just see if you can. So thinking slightly technically in the first take, and then the second one really go for it, but without too much uh, conscious interference. Just really, what there's a phrase that my old teacher used to use, Alex Kelly. He said, in a recording, Jonathan, you have to caress the microphone. And it's always stayed with me because I went to a session with him years ago where he was playing some Rawsthorne and other English composers, and it was very, very beautiful, very, very still. And I just remember how quiet his playing was. But he said, the microphone picks up everything. It'll even hear the brushing of the wool and the picking up of the wool from the hammers and the dampers. And he's absolutely right. So there were moments in some of the really quietest places where the combination of finally we're here, finally we're doing it, finally there's this glorious instrument, this wonderful acoustic, you're getting the sort of feedback of the room. And that's another thing that Stephen Huff mentioned in his book is about, when you play somewhere, first of all, when you warm up, you play the room, not the piano. You're finding out what's going to go. And of course, nothing's going to change because there's no audience. So to get to your point, there were some pieces where, yeah, there was that magic where you thought, oh, that I've never done that before. That was really the combination of this situation, the preparation, the intention of what it is you want to do, but you've failed to achieve on n number of occasions in practice because it's just a bit clumsy or a bit overdone. And suddenly you relax, you're in the moment, and that quality of sound you want, that voicing of the chord, that shine, that sheen, that burnishing comes out, and you say, oh, that was it. I had a little moment when the sun came from behind the clouds and just said, I'm going to bless you for a few seconds, my boy. Now you're a mere mortal again, and just get on with it. But there were
that is how it works.
Yes, it is.
You know what I mean? Just out of nowhere will come a moment that will last you all your life.
That's exactly right. And it's just, you have to just show up every day, do the work, and it's up to the powers that be to whether they'll sprinkle some magic stardust on that particular occasion to allow that to happen. But you just, for the record, say, I turned up, I did my part. If you want to give me all this extra loveliness that's a sort of byproduct that comes with that work, sometimes it comes off, sometimes you get a bit of magic, and sometimes you don't. And there were a couple, and I think that B minor Zelotti, the one that's sort of E minor, B minor, track 10, track 17, that Adagio, and for me also the very last one, which isn't a particularly sort of prepossessing piece, the little cantata.
I thought it was a perfect ending. Perfect art. It was just a perfect art to end.
And it's just trying to coax the sound out of the instrument in such a way for it to sound like the notes being breathed, like it's coming from an oboe. So there's a sense in which, as you play it, the note expands, has an actual chance to reach out, and that happened. I thought it. So for me, as a magic moment, thinking, oh, I finally got that one. Great. That might never happen again now, but hey, we got it. But those are the things.
Funny. I think just the Joe public doesn't realize that there are those moments where you go, that was magnificent of me, and it will never happen again. Sort of thing. The magic just happens, like that.
Yeah,
let's see.
Sometimes it's little things that just make you very satisfied that the work that you've done and the intention that you had and the objective that you had for the music all come together. You've got this wonderful thing. You've relaxed enough. You've got sufficient experience, and everything has just come together. And oh, wow, great. But it's just, then it's gone, and the next morning you're in the supermarket. It's like you're back to normal again. I think a lot of people think
it's so depressing, isn't it?
Yeah, we live in this world.
From the heavens to the produce section, it's awful.
Right,
but all of us live that way. But I want to sprinkle a little stardust, if you don't mind, which is that you have just described a little bit earlier what I was experiencing, but it was on this album, but couldn't quite describe, which is the quietude. The amazing quietude of the playing, and I, as a horrible pianist, earlier also was going to ask you about just the touch on the instrument. Some of those Steinways you just barely touch them. And the sound. But that comes through loud and clear. Whatever that is on this album, the quiet tones, I hear them totally clearly, and I also realize that they're pianissimo, if you will. Not really. But
yeah.
I think a huge compliment on the instrument and your playing.
Well, it's a fabulous piano. I mean, and for this repertoire, it was like I couldn't have asked for a better instrument. It's just just
the engineering
and the engineer.
Whoever the engineer was, because you can. What I'm so fascinated in now in my old age is and also doing CD reviews, and I'm not an acoustician at all, but to hear the sound of an instrument in its in its way, in its proper ways. To me, a miracle of microphone technology.
That's right. And in some ways, you think, oh, this can't be too difficult. But honestly, the piano, even good pianos, can sound terrible if they're not properly mic'd. And David Wright from Gemini Sound, although, as I say, he's mostly retired these days, I think he's an absolute master of his craft. And so
there's no retiring from that. There's no retiring. I mean, he's in the profession, if you will. He's in with us. We don't ever retire, do we? I don't think so.
I just have to give him a call and say, "Are you up for the next project?" So he went on the Chopin ballads that came out last week. He recorded the 5 nocturnes that are on that CD at St. John's, and it's really interesting because the four ballads were done elsewhere, and it's a different piano, and it's quite bright. And then there's this lovely kind of much more mellow thing that is this glorious piano at Oxford. So it's my kind of recording studio of choice, but it will be limited to things like nocturnes or Schubert or Brahms, all that really beautiful, spacious work. I wouldn't want to do the Liszt B minor on it, for example.
Yeah. Right. Also, and since we're there, we still have some minutes here. This will be another dumb one, I fear, but we've just described in great detail this glorious instrument.
Yeah.
And I'm throwing this out as for you to say, no, you fool, you got that wrong. But the album is so, as we've talked on almost ad nauseum, it's so quiet and so meditative, and the color is so warm and clear and clean. But occasionally, I thought I was hearing a brighter sound. Now, is that you, or do you even recall anything where you might think, in looking at the album, that a couple of the pieces seemed a little bright, the instrument seemed a little brighter? My question is that deliberate? Is that Tuesday as opposed to Wednesday? You know what I mean? All those factors, or am I out of my mind?
Well, I'm really impressed, because actually you are right, because as I said, this album, which is the one you've got, the JS Bach Tranquility,
there you go. Yep.
Originally went out on
I see.
And then they folded. That was Herald Records. It folded. But the point being that about 50 minutes worth of the recording was in October 2019 in Oxford on the piano with David doing his microphone stuff. And he photographed and measured where the piano was in relation to the sort of proscenium arch in the church, where he put his microphone, all that sort of very professional thing. And we went back in 2 years later to do the other 25 minutes worth of material. Same piano, same microphone, same kit, same guys, same measurements. We can put it there. But you've spotted that it is slightly different. There is.
You know what it is.
And I bet
if I know my theory.
I bet if you told me which pieces they were, you'd probably have picked the second recording session.
I'd have to go back, of course, which we won't now. But the point is, I'm glad that I brought that up. I was a little nervous that it was a silly question, but it's so interesting because, again, and my answer is, well, of course, the planet, the solar system, the galaxy we're in has moved over those years. So, of course, the sound in the ambience, just dead, so-called dead sound in the room, somehow is different, or it's a different time of year even. The tones are less cold than they were. I find that I couldn't care less because I'd rather, as you know, chase landscapes and have a good time as a creative person. But I'm fascinated by those kind of technicalities that I'm beginning to recognize. And also the magic of just sound around us, just how it changes.
That's right. For all of our planning to try and blend it in such a way that it would just be a seamless, we'll just add 20 more minutes of the same Bach in the same piano, same pianist, there is a difference. However much we try to nail it down to being precisely the same conditions, and with the experience of having been in there before, which would made it a little bit easier, because we knew how it's going to play out. But it's interesting that it does stand out to you, that there is.
Well, I'm just fascinated that I dared ask about it. And it does not. We're not having any critical conversation about the quality of the product whatsoever. We're talking about just the fascination of just the air around us in any given moment and how it does in fact change. And as I mentioned, I now hear those things more clearly when I can hear when the recording from last Tuesday it's now a week and a half later. You can just hear it. There's something different. Not all the time, but some. Oh, I'm glad I asked that question. I feel much better about myself. What have we not covered? And why don't you talk about the new CD that's coming out? Or am I premature?
Okay. Well, because there is a nice segue into that, because half of it was recorded at St. John's. As I say, so it's the Chopin's 4 ballads and 5 nocturnes to make a sort of hour's worth of program, because I just wanted to do the ballads really. They're pieces that I've lived with since I was a teenager. I've always wanted. They're just wonderful. I've played I played one when I was very young, very badly, and then I learnt the other ones. And I left number four until probably 10 years ago, um, because I just felt it was beyond me. I didn't really understand. I hadn't got. You need to get to a place where you possess the piece mentally, intellectually, before you get to the physical and muscular and in your bones thing. Just I hadn't quite got it, and then it just sort of clicked for me. And I thought, well, okay, that's working now. I understand how I'd like it to be. Now go do the work. So, so
And that's I think my analogy is I'm embarrassed to think of my career as a conductor when I was in my 20s and 30s. The music that I must have made must have been a horror. You know what I'm trying to say? I couldn't have had the slightest insight at all at that time. I was in my 20s. I was chasing fun and making music, and you know. So I love when maturity sets in.
Yeah, that's another interesting point just about the music business in particular, I suppose, is that there is a sort of well, I suppose for the economics of it, you've got the young stars coming through and they're all phenomenal. But the idea that they're all fully formed artists, they've got a lifetime to develop their craft, to do the concerts, to get things right, to get things wrong, to learn how to manage themselves, to just not overdo it, not to burn out, to give themselves time to absorb pieces, to really kind of. And I worry for a lot of youngsters who do really well in competitions and come along, and suddenly they're catapulted into fantastic schedules, and you just think you just need to do this slightly out of the way a little bit and learn your craft over a period of time to develop it. And so, from my own point of view, I've just quietly got on with it over the years. I've never been one to chase the limelight, Dan, but I've kept on doing my work and wanting to improve. And I finally felt, you know what, you better get this out the door soon, chum, because we're running out of time here. So while you still got breath and energy to do it, you better do it. But also that instinct for, all right, I see these with much more perspective now from my point of view, and looking back at, as you say, how badly you might have played them in your 20s and 30s and 40s, but actually you learn from that. I mean, that's the point, isn't it? It's an ongoing process of development, and that's the beautiful thing about it. And if I'm still around in 10 or 20 years' time, it may be that I'll look back and think, oh, come on, let's do it again. That was terrible. But that's the way it should be. Surely we just, that it's always, you're chasing that rainbow. And
the maturity is continuous. And the maturation, the intellectual maturation is continuous.
Exactly.
So that's why we're going to live longer. Frankly, our brains. I mean, my brain's pretty active. Of course, it all could go in a massive stroke, but you know what I mean. In other words, it's a wonder. It's a joy to be inquisitive.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's a joy. It's just a joy. It keeps us alive. So that's kind of what I was getting at. Anything else? Because I think we're going to wind it down.
Yeah, no, Dan, it's been a huge privilege talking to you. I'm so glad we managed to get together. I know you've had a very busy summer schedule. It's been a bit mad.
I'm trying to be retired, don't you know? And
I've heard that one before. Yeah,
it's about buying groceries and paying the rent, stuff like that. But the point is, it's pretty crazy. And of course the plague. I call it the plague because that's what it was. Put us all back. I think in more ways than one. Put us all way back. I love history. Now still have tremendous problem with the Merovingians and the Plantagenets, let alone the Holy Roman Empire, to say nothing of the earlier empire, all that you have interest in. But I'm working on it. One of these days, I'm going to figure out how the Holy Roman Empire went and what its history was and where Charles V fit in there. But I've completely forgotten what I was going to say. That's old age for you. But just the beauty of being inquisitive and inquiring always, and then also meditating on what we do, so that we can think things through. And that I think, just to kind of bring it around a little bit, that's what I loved about experiencing this album. It was, as you even kind of hint, we kind of got a quiet peek into your privacy, if you will, into the private world that you have mentioned in your notes. You kind of hesitated, or unless I'm incorrect, to
Yeah,
bring up.
that's absolutely it. Yeah, it's an offering. You know, it's there. I did this. I did it anyway, and that people have a listen. If they like it, great. You know, but I did it because I needed to do it. It chose me, I think. And that sounds a bit ostentatious, but it's true. I just had to do. Sometimes you have this idea. I've got to get this out of my system, and that was my
like writing, or it's like writing or anything else. And about maturity, I read Melville's Moby Dick in high school, and it was Greek.
Yeah.
19th century English was totally Greek to me as a kid. It was ridiculous for kids my age to read. I read it again in my old age, in my 60s, and all of a sudden I understood the language. I could understand 19th century English writing, things like that, just how it goes. So
yeah,
the longer the brain works, the happier we are, the more insights we get, all that good stuff about creative people. I hear I was looking for your name, and all I saw was your Bordeaux collection. We'll talk about that off camera. What a great pleasure to have a chat with British pianist Jonathan Phillips. And let's remind everybody, performingartsreview.net. I'll put all this stuff up there. I'll do the review one of these days as I get caught up on a million other things. But it's your 2023 Divine Art release. It's a wonderful label, very, very thoughtful, these releases. And it's called Tranquility. And it's your most tranquil choices, your curation of a meditative Bach, music of Bach, and wonderful transcriptions. We spoke about Busoni and so on. There's few transcriptions. Anyway, and above all, just this wonderful quietness that you gave us. This wonderful quietness. It's glorious.
Lovely.
Many thanks.
Thank you very much, Dan. It's been a pleasure talking to you. I really, really enjoyed it. And thank you so much for your feedback on the CD. It means a lot.
Good.
Great.
We'll see you again.